All right, short word on Purim. So in Purim, we find a very unique occurrence in which the Megillah divides up the Jewish people. Meaning in the Megillah, it says that there was a war between the Jews and the Amalekites, and that war happened at least on the 13th of Adar. And on the 14th of Adar, Jews who lived in unwalled cities had a victory, and they had rest, and they celebrated, right? While Jews who lived in the walled city of Shushan, they had one more day of fighting, which was the 14th of Adar. And on the 15th of Adar, they were able to celebrate the Purim festivities because they had won their victories. So essentially, in the Megillah itself, we see that there was a division amongst celebration of the Jewish people. Now, this is not a normal thing because we usually don't like the idea of splitting Jewish people up. We have an idea of a pasuk in the Torah that says, "Los tisgodedu," don't make groups of Jews. Don't like make one Jews. Some Jews do this, some Jews do that. It should be one law for all Jews. We're not talking about customs, but we're talking about laws right now. So why did Hashem see it fit to split up the Jewish people? Because this was a split that Hashem induced. It's not even a different custom. It's really something induced from Hashem. So first we need a little halachic background. It is brought by the rabbis that if a person forgot to say Birkas Torah, the blessing that we make before learning Torah, we make a blessing of Lasok B'drei Torah, and then we make a blessing of Asher Baruch Banu, and then we immediately learn some Torah afterwards to fulfill the blessing. That if somebody forgot to make those blessings, it's no problem. There's another blessing called Avarabba or Avos Olam, depending on your custom, and that blessing is very, very similar to Birkas Torah. And we make that blessing right before we say the Shema. So what you should do is if you forgot Birkas Torah, just say Avarab or Avos Olam right before you say Shema, and have in mind that that's fulfilling the mitzvah of saying Birkas Torah. And then when you're done davening, you'll learn some Torah immediately afterwards. So many ask the question of why do you have to learn Torah after davening at all? I mean, if you say Avos Olam or Avarava, you immediately follow that up with Shema because that blessing itself is a blessing of Kriya Shema. And Shema is based on Psukim. Shema is Psukim in the Torah. The Shema are verses in the Torah. So therefore, you shouldn't have to do an additional learning when you're done praying. You already fulfilled your obligation of learning with the Shema you just said. So comes along Rabbi Shlomo Kluger, and he teaches us a Yisod in Halacha, which is that if you are using something for a mitzvah, you cannot use that same thing at that same exact moment for a different purpose. So if you are saying Shema right now for the purposes of saying Shema and being Yotzei, the mitzvah to say Shema twice a day, then you can't count that saying of Shema as Torah learning. That's why you have to say it after davening. So now let's think. On Purim, the Jewish people are so busy with reading Megillah. Now, the Megillah itself is Torah. However, we see based on the previous Yisod we brought down from Rabbi Shlomo Kluger that when you're hearing the Megillah, you're not really getting credit for learning Torah. Why? Because when you're hearing the Megillah being read at the synagogue, you're fulfilling the mitzvah of hearing the Megillah read. You're not fulfilling the mitzvah of learning Torah. If you want to read the Megillah after you've already fulfilled your mitzvah of hearing the Megillah, then it would count as Talmud Torah. But if you're just doing it for the first time, no, it only counts as hearing Megillah being read. So we run into an issue. If all of Klal Yisrael were to be reading the Megillah at the exact same moment, then there would be a moment where there's no Jew learning Torah. And our rabbis tell us that if there's a single moment, even for a split second, where there's not one Jew in the entire world learning Torah, the world would come to an end. The world would explode, God forbid. So Hashem anticipated this issue. So in his infinite wisdom, he mixed the Megillah readings by having walled cities read on the 15th of Nisan, of Adar, and unwalled cities read on the 14th of Adar. So therefore, when the people who live in the unwalled cities are reading Megillah, the people in the walled cities can sit and learn Torah. And then the next day, it flips. So now we know not only what our job on Purim is. Our job on Purim is obviously to hear the Megillah. But for those of us who live outside of Jerusalem, who usually we see Shushan Purim as just a day where it's the hangover day, and it's a day where davening's a little later. It's a day where we don't say Tachnun and that's it. That couldn't be further from the emes. Shushan Purim is a day that you need to be learning Torah the most. It's a day where you are keeping the world up from Torah. Hashem designed it this way. You are acting as a guarantor for those who live in the walled cities. You have to look at them as your brethren. So next Shushan Purim, let us all steig hard in our learning so that we can actively keep the world going.